Hi, we've got a few things to talk about today, and I never make a script for these things, so it's all totally off the top of my head. But I've been thinking about, as we've moved past Battle of Britain Day, which was yesterday, 15th of September 2020, the 80th anniversary of Battle of Britain Day, the big turning point in the battle, and to look at what happened after that. Really, we had the video last week about the Messerschmitt 109E, and particularly about its role as a fighter bomber during the Battle of Britain, and that all came about after Battle of Britain Day as we moved into the last 10 days of September. Well, after that the bombing pattern changed as well, and this is one of the things. Now, Air Vice Marshal Johnny Johnson, our top scoring fighter pilot and arguably wing leader par excellence of the Second World War, particularly in terms of offensive operations, Normandy and so on and so forth, and Johnny, who studied leadership in detail, always used to say to me, "Dilip, the great thing is never change your plan. In war, always stick to the plan." And he used to cite the example of the American daylight bomber offensive. When it started, there were heavy casualties, but they stuck to their guns, literally, with the Norden bomb site, accurate bombing in daylight, although the casualties were very heavy, and public opinion at home, was divided about the wisdom of this campaign, but they stuck to it. Public opinion came on side, and the effect of that bombing, the accurate bombing, was exceptional. So they stuck to the plan, even though at first it wasn't easy. But the Germans didn't do that in the Battle of Britain. They kept changing tack, and I think there is probably two reasons for that. Firstly, because they undoubtedly suffered from poor intelligence throughout the Battle of Britain, and also the Battle of Britain itself and the opportunity to invade England by sea and to achieve aerial supremacy was unanticipated. So there had been no planning for this. There had been no operation of this magnitude before. So it was all a lash-up job, really, and they just kept changing tack when they were frustrated, when fighter command wasn't defeated, when they clearly weren't achieving the end result objective. So we have this attacks on Channel convoys, then radar stations, then airfields, and then London, and then when that doesn't work we go into yet another phase, and that's really what we're going to talk about today. Now, the phase that changed towards the end of September was starting to attack the British aircraft industry. Now, the problem with this is it's too little, too late. And by July 1940, the massive Castle Bromwich aircraft factory was in production near Birmingham, where the mass production methods of the automotive industry were applied by Lord Nuffield to manufacturing Spitfires. So that's inland as well, Birmingham, in the Midlands. So it's a fairly kind of safe target, really, in terms of daylight incursions, certainly by large formations. It's not going to happen. So but some of the other aircraft factories were quite vulnerable, and on the 25th of September the Germans successfully bombed the Bristol Aeroplane Works at Filton, which is at Bristol, and then on the 24th they attacked Southampton, the Supermarine factory there. We're going to talk about that in detail. 26th, Southampton again. 27th, the Bristol Aeroplane Works again at Filton, and so on. And on the 30th, the Westland aircraft factory at Yeovil was attacked, although that was a problem that we're going to talk about as well. And there's some good literature about this stuff, because my old friend Kenneth Wakefield, who was one of the historians who inspired me. Ken was an airline pilot who travelled to Germany extensively in the 70s, when there were a lot of surviving German aircrew to interview, and also eyewitnesses in this country. And his book Luftwaffe Encore features the raids on the West Country those aircraft factories at Yate and Filton on the 25th and 27th of September, and it's very much in the vein of Alfred Price's writing, who also inspired me and was another great friend. The interwoven first-hand accounts and official documents, you know, is very much in my style as well. So if you enjoy my books, you'd certainly enjoy Luftwaffe Encore by Ken. It was first published back in the 80s, I think, by William Kimber, and you can still get them today, ex-library copies, second-hand copies. I'm not sure whether it's been republished since, but you'll certainly find it on Books, Amazon or eBay, I expect. But it's a very, very, very good book. So this is the Supermarine factory at Southampton. Now Southampton's a vulnerable target because it's a big port, and it's equally vulnerable because of this. So this is where Supermarine first built the Spitfire, and the Spitfire was flown for the first time at Eastleigh, the airfield not far, just inland of Southampton. And this is on the banks of the River Itchen at Worcester, and there are in fact two factories here. This is the Worcester Works, and just up this road out of sight is the Ickes Works. And this railway embankment behind there, to get to the air raid shelters, the factory workers had to pass through a tunnel through this embankment onto Pear Tree Green, where the air raid shelters were. So just remember that. And Southampton, of course, is 60 miles due south of Sherbourne, around which are based German bombers and fighters. So it's a fairly easy southerly 60-mile sea crossing, and you're over the target. So Southampton very vulnerable. And inside they're producing Spitfires and have been since 1938, 36 rather, and the Spitfire enters service in 1938. We've got the Spitfire Mark 1A being produced down there, and the new twos being produced at Castle Bromwich. So Worcester is a really significant target. And on the 24th of September, one of those big raids by Kampfgeschwader 55s, Heinkel 111s, absolutely plastered it. And this is the railway here, and we're on the other side of the railway to the photo that showed the factory, and this is the Ickes Works. And what's happened is the workforce were trying to get into the shelters, and they're cramming through this tunnel, and there was a direct hit on the tunnel and on the air raid shelters, which killed a lot of people. And this is the same area today. This is the railway embankment. The fact the Ickes Works isn't there anymore, it's demolished, but that's behind me in the photograph, and this is where the tunnel was that all the people were killed in, and there was a lot of casualties down there that day. And two days later, KG-55 came back and finished the job, and you can see, I think, in this photo that the factory is absolutely gutted, but it was actually only out of production for a very short period. And you know, this is one of the reasons why we then end up with these shadow factories and the disbursement of Spitfire production, so that it's not all produced in one place, so that if one factory gets wiped out, that's not going to substantially affect Spitfire production. So we've got, you know, now that it's quite famous actually, the secret Spitfires and all of this, you know, about these shadow factories all over the place, Winchester and so on and so forth. But it was little known not that long ago. So you would have small parts produced by almost like a cottage industry really, and then brought together for final assembly. So quite clever really how this was dispersed to prevent a single attack wiping out production. But certainly there was an immense amount of damage in Worcester as well. These houses behind were flattened. It was a right mess. For Southampton, there were, I think I'm right in saying, something like 620 Soutonians killed during the Second World War as a result of bombing, and there were some 43,000 civilians killed in this country from bombing, half of them in London, and the other half spread across the other targets that were heavily bombed. So, you know, this is not an unsubstantial loss of life, is it? You know, these are civilians. And down at the Woolston factory has gone now as well. There's a doctor's surgery and flats on the site, and there used to be a floating bridge which was like a ferry across the Itchen. That's gone, but the slipways are there, which on the one side is in the photo of the factory, because of course Supermarine used to make seaplanes before the war, and there's the big road bridge now across the Itchen. So it's fundamentally changed down there, but it's good to see that there is a memorial there to those killed during the bombing, during the Battle of Britain, and those who were killed, you know, making the Spitfire. And amongst them, I think this is very sad. When I did Battle of Britain 1940, which was one of the two books for this year for the 80th anniversary, and I wanted very much to focus on the stories of casualties and tell some hidden history and some, you know, research and find some previously untold stories and information, and it's certainly in there. And one of the chapters is about the civilian bombing. It's about the bombing of Southampton during the Battle of Britain, the attack on the big attacks on the Supermarine factory, and amongst those killed on the 24th at Pear Tree Green were Douglas Cruikshank, who's a 14-year-old handy lad in the factory, and Margaret Peggy Moon, who was a 19-year-old typist down there as well. And these are their graves, which are at St Mary's Extra Cemetery in Southampton, which sadly are a little bit neglected, shall we say. And you know, I think the saddest thing is that although the families were traced, there's no photographs of those two people. And I think that is the saddest thing, that you can give your life, but your likeness is lost to the hidden record, to the historic record, and that's a sad thing, isn't it? That you know, your likeness is lost. Now I don't think that wouldn't happen today, because I'm sat here, I've got my iPhone on a tripod talking to you. You know, it's just so easy to make photographic records today. We must be the most photographed generation ever. We take photographs all the time, selfies, goodness knows what. It's all on social media, our lives are there, an open book for people to see. But of course, back in those days, photography wasn't quite so popular, it wasn't quite like that. So, you know, there are less photographs. If you wanted a photograph taken, you know, a lot of these pictures were formal family groups in studios, you know, and obviously that costs money. So, you know, it depends really whether there's a family archivist who's managed to collate the family records and preserve them, and in some cases, sadly, there isn't anything, and it is sad. So when you think about Southampton and producing those Spitfires, just remember Douglas Cruikshank, age 14, and Peggy Moon, age 19. Shocking, terrible. But moving on, the attacks on factories continued. So Ken had done the 25th and the 27th of September, and I decided many years ago now that I would do a similar exercise for the raid on Yeovil on Westlands on the 30th of September, and again on the 7th of October. And what was really the catalyst for this, which was published in 1994, Angriff Westland, which means attack Westland, it's a play on words, the Westland Aircraft Factory and the West Country, Angriff Westland. So two friends of mine who were Battle of Britain Hurricane pilots, Peter Fox and Dennis Nichols, they joined 56 Squadron at Boscombe Down as replacement pilots, and Peter was shot down on the 30th of September and bailed out, and Dennis, or Nick as we called him, was shot down a week later on the 7th of October raid. He bailed out, and we returned both of them to the crash sites of their aircraft and recovered what remained. And so those two events really sparked my interest in those 2 days fighting, and as it happened, it fitted into the pattern where Ken had done the 25th, 27th So this was then the 30th and the 7th of October. So what I'm probably going to do now, which is the obvious thing, is I may do a book about the bombing of those raids on Southampton and Supermarine. So it's always long interested me, and I did a lot of work around that in Southampton with people like Dave Key, who runs the Supermarine's website. Local historian down there is very helpful, and you know, to get all the stuff for the Battle of Britain 1940 chapter. It's quite fascinating down there, it really is. But on the 30th of September, the problem was that cloud obscured the target, and so the Germans missed Westland's factory and actually bombed and virtually obliterated Sherbourne town centre adjacent. And Sherbourne had no military significance whatsoever. It's one of these picturesque biscuit coloured stone West Country towns, and the town centre was pretty much flattened. So Sherbourne suffered again, you know, civilian casualties and so on. And this is Peter. This is Peter, who's aged 19 during the Battle of Britain, and this is him, very excited when we went down near Lyme Regis to recover his Hurricane. What was left of it, there wasn't a lot, but it was very interesting because he had a vivid account in his mind of bailing out and being shot down by a Messerschmitt 110, and he, as he was floating down by parachute, he made a real mental note of where the aircraft crashed, which was at the crosshatch junction of four fields, and he was absolutely right. That's exactly where we found it. And Peter was probably the most enthusiastic, rooting around with a shovel. But what a lot of people don't know is that to recover these aircraft, you have to have a licence from the Ministry of Defence. And I applied for the licence in Peter's name, and at the time we were operating as the Malvern Spitfire team, and Peter became a member of the team, so the licence was in his name. We recovered the aircraft. When we recover an aircraft, you have to submit a returns form to the Ministry of Defence detailing exactly what's been recovered, and then the Ministry of Defence will transfer the right of ownership from the Crown to the licence holder. So in this case, Peter Fox became the owner of his Battle of Britain Hurricane, even though it was in a zillion pieces. And this is me presenting Peter with a frame of conserved items from his aircraft at the launch of, I think, a few of the many at Worcester Guildhall on the 50th anniversary of VE Day in 1995. So that makes Peter unique. He is the only one of the few to actually own his own Battle of Britain aircraft. So how about that? That was a great thing to do. And Peter was a great friend of mine for many years, and a prolific correspondent. I got his memories about all kinds. So when I did Letters from the Few, which is the other 80th anniversary book for the survivors, I put the story of Peter and Dennis in here, based on their correspondence with me over the years. So it's nice to have that record of their experiences on these days. But sadly, Peter left us in 2006, and Dennis not that long afterwards, so they're both gone now, obviously. But yeah, a week after that, things sort of changed in the Battle of Britain, because by the 30th of September and the ill-fated raid on Sherbourne, the German bomber force was unable to continue sustaining such heavy losses by day. So what they then decided to do, in addition to having a squadron of Me-109s in each fighter wing kitted up as fighter bombers, so that these are fighter sweeps now, suddenly bombs are falling down and the RAF controllers can't ignore them anymore because they don't know which formations of fighters coming in are just fighters or whether they've got fighter bombers. So fighter command is in an exhausting period now. It's having to react to every incursion, and Geoffrey Wellham, Squadron Leader Geoffrey Wellham, DFC, author of First Light, the fabulous memoir, said to me once that he remembered it, that there were always 109s active in the Biggin Hill sector that caused problems, and that it was the most exhausting period of the Battle of Britain when they could be flying 3, 4, 5 patrols a day. So the Germans are mounting the pressure, but in a slightly different way. And the Heinkel 111, which is the slowest, a big sort of lumbering twin-engined aircraft, that is then wholly changed over to nocturnal operations. So at night, the British nocturnal defences are primitive. The Beaufighter, dedicated night fighting aircrafts, only just arrived in September 1940. Hitherto, the turret fighter, the Defiant, have been pressed into the nighttime role, along with the Blenheim fighter, twin-engine Blenheim fighter, and even Spitfires and Hurricanes. And in fact, all of that is discussed in detail in the video that I've done with Andy Long about the Defiant, which will be a YouTube premiere. So the night fighting situation isn't great because we haven't got airborne interception radar yet. This is all very rudimentary, very primitive. It's all being worked out. So it's safer for the Germans to bomb at night, but the trade-off is the fact that bombing is less accurate at night. Obviously there's a blackout, there's no radar in these aircraft at this time showing, a sort of digital map of the ground, if you like. So that's the trade-off. So the Heinkel is switched over to the night attacks, and by day what we're dealing with now is this wonderful airplane, the Junkers 88, which is the best German bomber, the best bomber that they had. Fast, manoeuvrable, quite heavily armed, machine guns here, here, and here, and over the course of the war, the Ju-88 was made over into a lot of things. A night fighter with various configurations of radar, all kinds. It was a dive bomber. It was an amazingly versatile aircraft and a very, very modern design. So the Ju-88 bomb load though is not massive. So we've got 4 external stores here. These are SC-250s, 500 pounders, plus we've got a bomb bay in here that's going to carry a few more bombs, but not a huge amount. So they're not going to do a massive amount of damage by a single aircraft. But the whole idea of this now is that incursions over England are going to be made by Grupper strength Ju-88. So a Grupper is a wing of 3 squadrons. So you're looking at round about 36 aircraft, heavily escorted by fighters. So the 7th of October raid, for example, and we're going to talk about that in another video in more detail, focusing on Dennis Nicholls' story. That was a case in point. KG-51's Ju-88s came over in Grupper strength like this, heavily escorted to that plan to attack Westlands at Yeovil. So these are still attacks on the aircraft industry. Now, looking at the map of Fighter Command, we've got 11 group down here, so this is London and the South East. What we're talking about with these attacks in the West Country is 10 group, just here, and then there's the Midlands in 12 group. So the other tactic that the Germans came up with was lone harassing attacks by Ju-88s, Storflüger. So these attacks are targeting, again at this time, targets to do with the aircraft industry, and they're being made by lone aircraft relying on speed, stealth, surprise and cover from bad weather, so cloud basically, and very difficult to intercept. So one particular occasion, and we don't know the unit because half of the German records from Luftwaffe 2 and 3 that fought the Battle of Britain, half of those records were destroyed. And if you look at where Worcester is, that we're going to talk about. This is my home city. Worcester is here. We are in the area responsibility of Luftwaffe 3, and this aircraft has come without a doubt up here, or it's come round this way, but it's from Luftwaffe 3 and the records were destroyed, so we cannot identify with absolute certainty which unit it was. And on the 3rd of October 1940 there were a number of units active over England. So these aircraft are coming in low, fast, or up in the clouds to escape detection. And in this case, this aircraft is probably, it could well have been this aircraft that attacked Worcester, and I'll explain why in a minute. But we've got these SC-250s under wing stores. Now, in Worcester, it's quite a small city. There is industry here. It's on the banks of the River Severn, but it's not a port city like Gloucester or Bristol. Gloucester's further downstream, Bristol's downstream further still in the estuary. You know, they were, well, certainly Bristol is a port city. Gloucester on the inland River Severn is still quite busy traffic really at that time. Worcester not quite so. And the industry around here, not really that impressive, to be honest, in many ways. Frank Bryan Sports in Bromyard Road, they produced leather goods, boxing gloves, cricket batting gloves and things after the war and before, and produced flying helmets and things like that, leather goods. But the MECO factory, the mining and engineering company in Bromyard Road, St John's, Worcester, about a mile from where I'm sitting now, produce surge drums for barrage balloons. So again, why would you want to send a Ju-88 all the way to Worcester, which is some considerable miles inland, just to attack somewhere that's making surge drums for barrage balloons? And this again is evidence of the poor intelligence that the Luftwaffe suffered from during the Battle of Britain. So at 12:20 p.m, and this is lunchtime now, so people are leaving the factory to go into the canteen, and wallop, this Ju-88 pops out the cloud over Worcester, orbits, picks out the target. Now, people over the years, there's a lot of nonsense written about this, and in local folklore it was a Heinkel 111. No, it wasn't. It was a Ju-88 beyond a shadow of a doubt. And it was a random attack. No, it wasn't. This was a very, very skillfully executed harassing attack, relying on cloud, popped out the cloud over Worcester and made, you know, a positive target identification, and then attacked it at low level. And the aircraft has come in over the Bromyard Road and it's dropped 2 bombs. So they're the external stores, and it's lofted them, a bit like a tornado in the Gulf War. Going in, I remember John Peters' Tornado Down explaining it all to me once, about the maths of going in and at the optimum point lofting the bombs off, and the aircraft comes up, you know. And that's what's happened, and they've skidded across the road and gone through the wall of the factory and caused an immense amount of damage. So the houses adjacent to the factory were also damaged. This is Happyland West, and sadly there was a little girl in the window of one of these houses, Doris Tyndall, who lost her sight, which was very sad. And this is the same place a few years ago. But it was actually back in action pretty swiftly. And this was a telegram from Lord Beaverbrook, the Minister for Aircraft Production. Wire back, full particulars, deaths and injuries, maximum extent of damage, and estimated earliest date of continuation of production. And the work restarted just a few days later. And there was a plaque in the factory. I don't know whether it's still there. There was talk about some memorial this year, but I don't think that's happening for obvious reasons. But these are the people who were killed. So there were 7 killed, and Doris, who sadly lost her eyesight. And when I did Angriff Westland, because it fitted with this pattern of attacks on the aircraft industry, we got Sherbourne, Westlands, 30th September, and that's your Heinkel 111s. Then 3rd of October, Storflüger, Sloan Ju-88 attacking Worcester. Put that in as well as an example of the other type of attack. 7th of October, the Gruppe of KG-51 Ju-88s that's coming. That's an example of the other type of attack that was happening. So it was quite good to get that all in there. So that was a Storflüger. Now on the same day, this aircraft, which this is an accurate 1/32 scale model of, was actually shot down by anti-aircraft fire at low level attacking Hatfield Aerodrome. Now flying time from Worcester, that's not actually that far. Probably take less than an hour, I would think, a lot less. And it just makes you wonder, why would a Ju-88 fly all the way to Worcester and just drop 2 bombs? Now I wonder really whether the timings of this, whether that aircraft could have been the one that attacked Worcester and dropped 2 bombs on Worcester, and then what went to drop bombs on Hatfield Airfield where it was shot down. Banbury was also attacked, and if you look at, I mean, Banbury's not far from Worcester, about 40 miles, and Banbury's probably about equidistant between Worcester and Hatfield. So it makes you wonder really. I cannot see that you're going to fly all the way from Cherbourg or Paris to drop 2 500-pound bombs on an obscure factory in Worcester. So I'm sure that that aircraft could well have attacked Banbury as well. Or it could even have been that one. We'll never know because the records don't exist, you know. So there we are. But very, very interesting, the whole thing. Now, when we did the Angriff Westland project, which was in the sort of 93, 94 time, Ant Whitehead, who was one of the Malvern Spitfire team members, did some legwork around the Bromyard Road area of St John's to try and find me eyewitnesses and so on, which he did a great job of, and was shown into, I think it was the office of a car rental place or something like that, and was actually shown the nose cone off one of these SC-250s, one of the very bombs that had dropped on the MECO on that day, 3rd of October. There it was, in the reception of this place. And anyway, we communicated with the owner, whose father had taken it at the time, and I wanted to put it on show at a book launch and an event that we had in Worcester, launching the book, but he wouldn't allow it, and I ideally wanted it donated to Worcester City Museum, but that fell on deaf ears as well, and there the matter lay. But last year we made some inquiries to try and find out what's happened to it, because it would have been fantastic to have revisited it. Maybe things have changed and it could be donated to Worcester City Museum or some such, and sadly the thing's disappeared now. So we'll end this little video on a bit of a mystery. Where is that nose cone off that SC-250? I cannot believe it's disappeared into thin air, and it's an incredibly historically important and valuable piece. So if anybody ever watches this video and you know where it is, I'd be delighted to hear from you via my website. I really would. What a shame that that didn't end up going to Worcester City Museum. But anyway, there we are. Just a little bit about the attacks on the aircraft industry during the Battle of Britain, the fantastic Junkers 88 aircraft, and some more of these wonderful people who sadly lost their lives or fought the Battle of Britain and are no longer with us. And in this 80th anniversary year, you know, we're going to remember them, aren't we? We're going to remember all of them. So thank you for listening. I hope you've learnt something. I hope you've enjoyed it. And we're going to be sharing many, many more stories in the weeks and months ahead. Thank you.